She was a princess of royal blood, chosen as a bride, offered as a gift, and remembered only by the way she died. Buried alive, skinned, and sacrificed by the very people she was meant to unite. Her name has been lost to history, but her death would ignite fear across an empire and mark the birth of the most feared civilization in Mesoamerica, the Aztecs. And here, before we go deeper, drop your location and what time it is where you're watching. I love seeing how far these stories reach. It began in 1323, long before pyramids rose over Tenochtitlán. The Mexica people, not yet known as the Aztecs, were newcomers in the Valley of Mexico, migrants, outsiders, warriors for hire. They had no city of their own. To gain favor and land, they pledged allegiance to Culhuacan, one of the most powerful city-states in the region. The Culhua were heirs of the legendary Toltecs, claiming divine ancestry, strict ceremonial codes, and a deep-rooted disdain for the barbaric Mexica. But politics made strange allies. The Culhua ruler, Coxuc, agreed to a diplomatic marriage. He gave his daughter, a princess of noble Toltec blood, to the Mexica leader Tenochtitlán, who accepted her as a wife for his son. The Mexica were overjoyed. To them, this union was proof they were finally being accepted. But behind their celebration, a plan was already taking shape, one that would shake even the gods. The Mexica had long practiced a ritual known as Ocpanistli, the sweeping of the roads, part harvest festival, part preparation for war. At its heart was the goddess Toki, the grandmother of the gods, who had once in myth been a princess herself. Each year Toki had to be reborn through blood and sacrifice, and this year the Mexica made a chilling decision. Their newly gifted princess would become the living embodiment of the goddess. They never told her. She was brought to the temple. Some say she was honored, dressed in fine garments, adorned like a goddess. Others say she was deceived, told nothing of her fate. As the ceremony began, she may have looked out on the crowd, searching for a familiar face, unaware of what was coming. The priests took her. They flayed her skin from her body while she was still alive. Her flesh, in their belief, was now divine. Toki reborn through human pain. Her death was not murder but myth incarnate. This was not just sacrifice. It was theater, religion, politics, all fused into a single horrifying act. The Culhua were outraged. To them, this was treachery, sacrilege. The fragile alliance was shattered. And the Mexica, they had made their point. They were no longer servants, no longer outsiders. They had power now, terrible, blood-soaked, undeniable. The aftermath of the sacrificial ritual exploded into political chaos. The Mexica believed they had performed a masterpiece, a living myth made manifest. But for their hosts in Culhuacan, it was sheer betrayal. When the princess's flayed skin was draped over a priest like a grotesque cloak, and the flesh became an instrument for religious transcendence, her father, King Coxuc, also known as Tenochtitlán in some sources, was stunned into fury. This wasn't a pious offering, it was war. In one version of the fateful scene, an unknowing Coxuc was invited to revel in the feast, only to be confronted with the priest emerging in his daughter's bloody visage. Horror turned to rage, pride shattered, and the alliance was instantly annihilated. What began as a symbol of union, diplomacy, and shared ritual ended as a stain of betrayal on Mexica honor and a flashpoint for centuries of enmity. The Mexica were expelled from Culhuacan's lands. Homeless once more, they drifted toward the shores of Lake Texaco. There, guided by their war deity and hummingbird god, Huitzilopochtli, they founded Tenochtitlán, a city destined to become the monumental heart of the Aztec Empire. Out of rejection, they forged a new world on an island, in clay with canals and causeways. This wound of betrayal propelled their transformation from itinerant outcasts into planners of an empire. But what truly haunted their souls? The flaying ritual held deeper meaning. The Mexica believed their girl princess, chosen as proxy or Ixitla for Toki, the our grandmother deity, was reborn through sacrifice. She became Toki's incarnation, her skin the literal embodiment of the goddess's flesh. A priest donned the flayed skin, and through him Toki herself descended among the people, renewing fertility, war, and ritualistic power. Year after year during Tenochtitlán, the ritual was repeated, but each time on a woman of humble origins, a ritual replacement, not a princess. The mythology held that Toki had once been a Tenochtitlán princess. The Mexica believed by sacrificing a real princess in 1323, they accelerated history, anointing Toki in blood, and cementing their divine destiny. Every festival afterward honored and remembered that inaugural offering. The myth is not just symbolic, it is structural. Following the flaying, the Mexica elite believed they had shed their outsider status. From being vassals to Toltec descendants, they became worshippers turned rulers. Their empire was built on blood bond. Their enemies were defeated in war. Their ancestors redefined themselves through conquest and theological authority. Yet this foundation was not peaceful. The Kolowa burial of the princess colored future politics with resentment, and the sacrifice's aftermath sent a clear message. The Mexica respected no boundaries, sacred or political. Their temples would soon sprawl skywards. Their armies would march westward. Their gods would demand an endless cascade of blood. And so, in that moment of flesh and fire, a queen was buried alive, flayed into myth, and the Aztec world began to rise. But the spark of empire is often lit in cruelty, and the roots of greatness are stained in blood. The blood of betrayal still stained their hands when the Mexica fled Culhuacan. Driven from their land, they retreated to Tenochtitlán, a swampy marsh 10 kilometers away, their hopes sinking as deep as their feet. The Kolowa chieftain Tenochtitlan's fury echoed, "They have killed my daughter, flayed her and made me worship him." It was a declaration of war by other means, and the Mexica knew they were outcasts once more. But sometimes in ruin, empires take root. The Mexica braced against the reeds and mud, desperate and ragged. It was then that Huitzilopochtli, their hummingbird war god, spoke through a dream. He commanded them, "Seek the eagle on the cactus, as soon as you see it." By 1325, amidst fog and reeds off what would become Lake Texaco, they spotted it, a golden eagle perched on a prickly cactus. It was their sign, their divine permission. With newly found purpose they began to build. Fingers stiff and cold, they wove chanpas, floating gardens anchored in the shallow lake, transforming swampland into fields. They trudged paths over water, piled dirt and laid foundation. From this determination, Tenochtitlan rose, tiny at first, an island city watched over by gods and ghosts of past betrayal. Now imagine yourself there, aqueduct water splashing around your ankles, wooden scaffolds creaking, men chanting to Huitzilopochtli as they prop up the first temple platform. Their hearts, scarred from exile, beat with desperation and resolve. This was no budding utopia. It was born of rejection and nurtured by vengeance. In the months that followed, they honed their identity. Each Tenochtitlan festival, they reenacted the sacrifice of a woman, now symbolic, not political. The myths lived on. Inga Clendinen's retelling evokes horror. The victim marched through town, selling corn or flowers, smiling through hysteria. Laid atop the Chacmul stone, her throat cut, flesh peeled, skin worn by a priest, an avatar of Toki herself. Through these rituals the Mexica reshaped themselves, from vassals to gods, from outcasts to heirs of the Toltec legacy. The Mexica felt the power of myth. Through sacrifice they became the myth. Toki, once mortal princess, was now divine, her legacy stitched into each temple and each ceremonial blade. And strategy followed theology. Within decades, Tenochtitlan grew into a nexus of trade, tribute and military might. Year by year the Mexica pressured neighbors, forging alliances and waging wars. Its Sultan and Tlacaelel would later codify their religion, an empire bolstered by a foundation of blood, myth, and purpose. Yet behind every expansion lay the primal moment, the sacrifice of one woman still alive, her fate buried under layers of faith and ambition. That initial act did more than sever her life. It severed the Mexica from dependence, bound them to divine destiny, and laid a template for empire building through ritual violence. But as the city stone rose and banners unfurled, did any remember the buried princess whose skin had kindled them? They worshipped her as Toki. They reenacted her death. But remembrance isn't always mercy. In death she became myth. In myth, she was empire. Generations have passed since that forgotten princess was sacrificed. And yet the legend of Toki the Flayed One lives on like a scar etched into the Aztec psyche. You walk through the grand avenues of Tenochtitlán, the city now spread across its lacustrine cradle, temples towering above, like gods made manifest in stone. Everyday life is a pageant of ritual, commerce, politics, but at its heart lies the memory of one woman's death. By the time its Tenochtitlán rose to leadership in the mid-15th century, the Mexica had fully embraced state-building through myth and sacrifice. They rewrote their own origins, placing that first flaying at the center of their foundation story. Toki, once a princess, buried by betrayal, became a goddess whose ritual renewal legitimized every conquest. In Tenochtitlan's words, they reshaped the narrative. It is better to die honoring the gods than to live dishonored, an echo of that princess's fate. In 1489, the temple of Toki in Tenochtitlan's ceremonial precinct was adorned with depictions of female divinity, flayed and holy. Her image appeared on altars and in codices, skin strings draped like ceremonial garlands. People offered turkeys, flowers, maize and their thanks for wars won and cities built. It was as though every triumph had her blood in its roots. But myth is a double-edged blade. Toki's worship demanded more victims. The early sacrifice of a real princess became ritualized on a daily scale. Tens of thousands were sacrificed, prisoners of war, slaves, even children, each death a remembrance of that first flaying. The Mexica believed, to feed the gods was to feed the empire, and so Tenochtitlan's greatness glowed in terror. And centuries later, Spanish conquistadors led by Hernán Cortés would encounter this empire of sacrifice and myth. They were horrified, yet oddly mesmerized. Bernal Díaz del Castillo recounted the flaying ceremonies with visceral detail, branding them sacrilegious and savage. When the Spaniards burned the temple of Toki in 1521, they thought they erased a past. Instead, they converted it, built St. Augustine's church over her temple. They buried Toki's cult under Christian soil, but could never fully erase her myth. If you look closely at the stones of modern Mexico City, Tenochtitlan's lair, you'll see fragments of that past. Archaeologists uncover human bones, shards of obsidian, remains of flayed skin used in ritual, a fragment of cloth stained with residue from copal incense, and a burial site that might match the place where the princess was sacrificed. In 2017, scholars announced the discovery of a ritual sacrifice pit at the base of what was once the temple precinct. A gruesome reminder that the origins of empire were soaked in blood. So what are we left with? A princess, buried alive in myth. Toki, the goddess of wounds and renewal. A people who turned trauma into divinity. A civilization born of violence and belief. And the echo of one woman's death, shaping an empire's soul. When you next walk through the streets of Mexico City, look down. Under your feet lies a city of water and stone, sacrifice and salvation. Somewhere in its depths is the buried memory of a princess who never asked to be a goddess, whose life was given and taken in service of empire, and whose legacy was written in blood.